It was the winter of 2000. I was in my hometown of Anchorage. On this evening, I was relaxing on the couch, planning on watching another rerun of Seinfeld before turning in for the night. It is worth mentioning that my girlfriend at the time happened to be an Alaskan native. She had recently put the kids to bed and was taking a shower. My girlfriend's sister was visiting our home. She was staying in the downstairs spare bedroom. She was in town due to having some medical checkups scheduled for the following week at A&MC. We lived in a subdivision off Arctic Boulevard that bordered Chester Creek. This area is called Midtown. It's not too far from downtown Anchorage. I suppose the time was around 10 or 11 p.m. The moon was large and full that January night. I remember looking out the front room window, seeing the rooftops of the neighboring houses sharply silhouetted in the glow. My dog lazily snoozed on the floor next to the couch. Eventually, my eyes also started to get heavy. This was due to the background noise of the television mixing with the white noise of the shower and had a calming effect. The baseboard heater quietly clicked and popped, wrapping me in relaxing warmth, and I soon dozed off. Suddenly, I was awoken by a sharp, jolting burst of sound. My eyes immediately snapped open in shock. This tone ripped through the tranquility of the peaceful night with gravelly croaking. There was no mistaking that sound, especially during the winter months in Alaska. This was the sound of a raven. I remember thinking, why the hell is a raven making a racket at this time of the night? I barely had time to finish that thought when I heard the bedroom door fly open and then the sound of hurrying footsteps. I look up in time to see my girlfriend quickly putting on her robe as she runs to each kid's bedroom, anxiously checking in on them. I sat up on the couch, still dazed from my interrupted sleep, trying to get my head around what exactly I was seeing and hearing and why all the commotion. I glanced over to the TV and saw static across the screen. The time on the DVD player displayed 3 a.m. in green light. The dog was up and alert. The hackles stood tall down its back. Suddenly, the sister quickly comes up the stairs. She had a genuine look of wide-eyed concern and alarm deeply etched on her face. Once my girlfriend made sure the kids were safe and asleep, she worriedly looked out each window. For what, I had no idea until she stopped dead in her tracks at the window in front of me. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" the sister kept fearfully whispering to herself. Slowly wringing her nightshirt in her hands, timidly shuffling across the floor towards the living room window next to her sister. I couldn't understand why both the sisters and the dog were having such an intense reaction. The scene was surreal. I found myself in a confused daze as I stood up and approached the window myself. There was the culprit perched on the handrail of our deck. I've always known ravens to be large birds, yet this bird seemed utterly massive this close. The bird was so black that its feathers took on a deep purplish hue in the moonlight glow. Its large, round, inky black eyes assessed each of us individually. It intelligently eyeing us up and down as it sharply cut its head from side to side. It yet seemed to take a greater interest in the sisters. This bird carried an intense, still, and heavy presence. It showed absolutely no fear of the humans that stood before it. It methodically stretched out its neck and opened its beak wide. A few seconds of silence passed until it made a sound I had never heard from a raven before or after this bizarre night. The mournful cry it made reminded me of the wail of a small infant. The raven slowly weaved its head in a low figure-8 pattern as it made this continuous cry. The moment that sound filled the night air, a cold chill prickled down my neck and across my back. I was filled with a sense of loneliness I had never felt before. I quickly glanced over at the sisters. They were tightly clinging to each other, knuckles white, with teary eyes keenly locked on the bird's bizarre display. I immediately thought that I was witnessing something I was not meant to see. I was very much an interloper in a personal exchange. Once the bird finished this almost ritual-like behavior, it quietly eyed both of the women for a few more moments before leaping off into the night. An item lay where the bird once perched on the railing. Curiosity getting the best of me, mixed with the desperate need to escape the strange and awkward atmosphere that overcame the room, I heaved open the half-frozen sliding door to enter the deck to retrieve the item. The weather outside being bitterly cold, I instantly regretted my decision as my body went into an immediate shiver. The skin on my face was tightening while my ears and nose burned painfully. The snow squeaked loudly beneath my bare feet as I gingerly approached the item. The mystery gift left behind soon became clear. It was a small bundle of needles from a spruce tree that lay on the barren rail. Clearly, the women were both shaken to their core that night. A quiet melancholy soon followed and lingered heavily on the sisters, continuing through the following days after the bird's departure. The reason why was unknown to each of us, yet I had a strong gut feeling that it was not my place to talk about what we each saw. A few days passed. Once I got off work, the three of us decided to take the dog for a walk on a community trail not far behind our subdivision. Heavy cloud cover filled the sky over Anchorage that evening. Large snowflakes slowly fell. The walk was mainly dark, except for the occasional light pole that sparsely dotted the trail, washing the path in a fluorescent glow. The sounds of 6 p.m. city traffic droned in the background. We talked amongst ourselves when we heard a man's low, weak cry for help in the darkness ahead. We immediately stopped and listened. The dog's ears snapped forward, head pointing slightly off the trail. A long whimper-like growl emitted from the animal's core, followed by a concerned huff. Once more, we hear a weak, agonized voice call out, pleading for God's intervention. The cry drifted through the snow-laden spruce trees that lined the trail. I glanced down and noticed a footpath in the snow leading through the woodland in the direction of the cries. I hand the dog's leash to the sisters and tell them to stay put. Both women sharply plead for me not to go as I continue into the murk to investigate. As I weave my way through the tiny trail, my feet bust through the upper crust of snow and I sink to thigh depth. I continue to slog my way forward. Before long, I come to a clearing in the trail. In the darkness, I can make out the silhouette of a lone tent. I call out as I approach the tent, only to be met with silence. When I'm closer, I notice a battered tarp draped over the tent, shell haphazardly. An inch of snow lay on the tarp, and the cheap tent bows under the weight. The unzipped tent entrance gave the appearance of a gaping black mouth in the gloom. I strained to look inside and call out a sharp, "Hello?" Not a sound or any movement came from the tent. My concentration was suddenly broken. Irritated and worried calls from the sisters rang out, demanding for me to come back. Before making my way back to the main trail, though, I investigated the campsite. Piles of trash littered the area in dark mounds. I made out some of what appeared to be scattered empty food containers, white trash bags ripped open full of miscellaneous used clothing. Broken children's toys lay beside empty beer and alcohol containers. Frozen clothing remained hanging from the hacked-up trees that surrounded the site. A deep, low sobbing drifted from behind me down the trail from where I came. The women again loudly shouted for my return with urgency. I, as quickly as possible, made my way back to the sisters. They both pointed to the direction from where the cry came. The focus was down the wide main trail that eventually opened up into an empty city park named the Valley of the Moon. We called out as we cautiously searched the entire park. The only response was the muffled noise of a city in the winter. We made our way to a metal-roofed pavilion. Underneath the structure sat a few graffitied, weather-beaten wooden picnic tables. This area was the only spot in the park not covered in snow. We decided at this point that it would be best to call APD and inform them of everything. We did precisely that. An APD arrived, performed a search, and found nothing. Being late, we now started for home. We were making our way through the playground, passing a tall rocket-shaped jungle gym, when the sister gave a sharp, loud gasp. We glanced over to see she was looking upwards. The city lights reflected a deep red hue on the heavy snow-laden clouds, revealing a large black silhouette of a raven who sat silently perched. We all felt the familiar heaviness of its gaze. My stomach tightened as we continued forward, lowering our faces from the pelting snow while picking up our pace in our walk home. 2 days later, the morning came for the sister to leave. We were getting ready to drop her off at the airport when my home phone rang. My girlfriend answers the phone. I was loading the sister's bags into the truck when I heard loud shouting and screams coming from the house. I soon found both women crying hysterically for their nephew. Alfred was a quiet boy who grew into an even quieter young man. He was raised in a village in southeast Alaska by his grandparents and aunties. Alfred became heavily addicted to alcohol, so much so his family sent him to Anchorage in hopes of treatment. Unfortunately, the treatment never took hold after many attempts. Eventually, he found himself homeless on the streets of Anchorage. He was ashamed of his situation and refused to return home, ignoring his family's pleas to return. He steadily continued to sink deeper into his addiction. Alfred became a living ghost in the urban landscape. He survived living hand-to-mouth by panhandling and stealing. Being afraid to sleep at the local homeless shelters at night, Alfred preferred to sleep where he could. One cold night he closed his eyes and never opened them again. The Spenard Community Patrol found his frozen body early the following day. The police report stated Alfred's body was found in a fetal position. The man was lying on top of a picnic table underneath the pavilion at the Valley of the Moon Park. When found, it was also mentioned that his body was covered in spruce boughs in a desperate attempt to stay warm. The night Alfred died was the very night we received our visit and gift from the mysterious raven. Unbeknown to us, 3 days after Alfred's death, we heard the sad cries for help in the park, the same park where he died. I had often wondered, looking back, if the raven kept silent watch over him that bitterly cold night when he passed away. Maybe Alfred was able to catch a glimpse of its dark silhouette in the yellow moonlight high up on its perch. Perhaps he also felt the heavy gaze upon him during his final moments. We will never know. I like to tell myself the bird was there, and Alfred found comfort in the gaze, knowing he was not alone. He would have a companion during his final walk through the dark wilderness in its eternal journey home. The sisters and their family never once referred to this mysterious bird as raven. They called it by its original ancient name, the name given to it by their people in the myths and legends centuries ago, the sacred name of Yael. This was about 5 years ago now. It was a sunny afternoon, and I had just put some wild bird food out on the garden. I went inside and stood at the window overlooking the garden to watch the birds. The bird feeders are in and around a large buddleia that's practically the size of a 10-foot tree at this point. Then I saw a bright green light, or orb, in the buddleia, maybe a bit bigger than a tennis ball. At first it didn't move, and I was trying to make sense of it. I wondered for a second if it could possibly be the kid next door flashing some kind of light or laser, but the light flashed and then moved within the buddleia and disappeared. A few seconds later it reappeared, but it was weaving between the branches organically, like dancing or waving around, and I knew there was no way it could be from a light or laser. I slightly freaked out and thought I was going to have a stroke or seizure or something, because I could so clearly see these lights right in front of me. So I ran into my mom just in case something happened to me. Sounds stupid, I know, but I couldn't make sense of it, and I couldn't peg it down to anything paranormal at that time because I've never heard of anything like that before. I haven't seen the lights since, and I have no idea what they were. They weren't frightening or anything like that. The worst part about it was me thinking it was my brain causing it. But it's honestly the weirdest thing that I've ever seen with my own eyes, and I've seen a fair bit in my time. When I was younger, my family and I would often go up to a cabin. The cabin is owned by my father's friend who allows us to stay free of charge. The cabin is a part of a small line of about 10 other cabins with a gravel road dividing them. It's a cute little area we still visit to this day. We usually stay a week, but one time I went ice fishing with just my father when I was about 8 or 9. We go up in the winter and in the summer. We weren't planning on staying there for the night, but by the time we were done ice fishing, we were cold and he didn't feel like driving. Our house is about 2 hours away. There are 3 bedrooms in total. The one I stayed in that night had a bunk bed, and I slept on the top and my dad slept on the bottom. I was on my DS fairly late. I wasn't really tired. It was probably around 1 to 2 a.m. I'm sorry to be so specific. I just feel like it's important to include everything to avoid confusion. But out of nowhere, all sound completely cut out for me, and all I heard was the name Jackie. Weirdly, I wasn't freaked out by this. It's like I had gone deaf for a few seconds and just heard this name, and then everything was back to normal. I decided to call it a night and went to bed. I told my dad a few years later what had happened. The lake next to our cabin was originally a town that was flooded by the government when they constructed a dam back in the late 20s, I believe. What I didn't know is that there was also a large cemetery that was a part of the town. My parents believe this might be an answer to what I experienced that night. When we go to the cabin now, I don't usually see or hear anything besides feeling really uncomfortable when I'm alone. I feel like something really likes me there, if that makes sense. It's not scary, it's just weird. We live in North Texas. My boyfriend's house is a 2-story house, the upstairs consisting of only the master suite. The staircase starts across from the kitchen and goes straight up into a wall. There is a 90-degree angle opening to the bedroom door. There are no vents on this staircase. Once inside the door, there is a small hallway section that has doors on either side, one to the bathroom and one to the closet. From there, you walk into the room, on one side being the bed, on the other side having a lounge area with a TV and recliner. I had stayed at my boyfriend's house a few times and had a few experiences where, when in the house alone, I would hear very distinct sounds of boots stomping around downstairs. I'm not a stranger to ghostly activity, so I kind of laughed it off, but did not let it bother me too much. My boyfriend said that he has had a few paranormal encounters in the house, but nothing like that. One night, I was laying in bed watching TV. My boyfriend was standing by the hallway leading into the room with our cat. He was commenting on feeling a draft under the door, which is strange because, again, there are no vents and the hallway leading into the room is a 90-degree angle. I hear the door start to creak open and see him and the cat react at the same time and snap towards the door. Then I hear the door slam shut and boots running up and down and up and down and up and down the stairs. This continued for a few minutes and then stopped. This was horrifying. I didn't know how to handle myself. This same sound happened multiple times every few nights for a couple of weeks. We would be trying to sleep and hear boots up and down, up and down, up and down the stairs, but nobody would be there. It happened so often that eventually we just learned to ignore it. Then the activity stopped seemingly out of nowhere. Additionally, in the master closet, there is a small hatch in the ceiling that leads to additional attic space that is not accessible from the main attic. Sometimes we can hear shuffling around up there and walking. My boyfriend refused to look up there ever since moving in for fear he might find something scary. We recently had an inspector look up there because we're having our insulation redone, and he said it looks practically untouched up there. No sign of any animal activity. I had come to terms that maybe there was a ghost in the house, but recent events have led me to believe there is something worse here. I have since moved into the house with my pets. Our couch is a sectional, and when laying on the far side, you can see straight towards the back door. Our back door has a storm door with a doggy door on it, and we call all the dogs in for the night and close the actual back door, which does not have a dog door on it. One night after dinner, I was watching a movie on the couch while my boyfriend was upstairs playing video games. I heard a scratching at the door and went to open it, to find my Shih Tzu had been locked outside. I let him in and pet him. He growled a bit and ran off. This isn't very unusual for him, to be honest. He's kind of a jerk, so I didn't think anything of it. I went back to watching my movie. A while later, my boyfriend came downstairs to join me, and I let him know that he must have locked Odie outside when he called all the dogs in. He swears to me that Odie has been upstairs with him this entire time. He swore that he was laying in his lap and actually kind of annoying him, getting in his way while he was trying to play games. We have a kind of heated, half-joking but mostly serious disagreement about this because we both swear we saw Oatmeal in 2 different places at once. We agree to disagree, and I let the incident go. It was weird. It was really weird, but I decide that my boyfriend must have been mistaken, and Odie must have joined him for games after I let him in, and my boyfriend must have been so enthralled in the games he just assumed Odie was there the whole time. A month or so later, another incident with this shadow Oatmeal occurs. I wake up for work and bring Oatmeal downstairs with me so he can go outside to potty. I always close the bedroom door behind me when I do this, so Odie doesn't go back upstairs and wake my boyfriend up, because once Odie is awake, all he wants to do is play. I go to work and come home. I don't think anything of it. Once I get home, my boyfriend is telling me how Odie had to sleep downstairs last night because he got in trouble after I went to bed. I laugh at the story and ask my boyfriend when he softened up and let Oatmeal back in. He gets immediately confused and says he didn't. I tell him that when I woke up this morning, Oatmeal was sleeping by my feet as always, and I took Odie downstairs this morning. We again have a disagreement because we swear we saw him in 2 places at once. I again brush it off. This leads us to tonight, when the absolute most horrifying thing to ever happen to me happens. We are in bed watching videos on our phones. I'm on my side facing the wall. Oatmeal is laying up against my feet on the edge of the bed. I feel something move up in between me and my boyfriend. I assume it is my cat. It turns a couple of times and settles in. I think this is a bit strange because my cat usually only sleeps on top of me. If I move him, he will just keep climbing back up. But I don't turn. About 5 minutes later, I hear a growl that is unmistakably Oatmeal's come from the lump in between me and my boyfriend, and I hear my boyfriend scold Oatmeal and shoo him off the bed. I tell myself that it must be my cat by my feet then. My boyfriend turns on his bedside lamp, and Oatmeal is sleeping soundly next to my feet, and my cat is sleeping in a ball across the room. We are both in shambles. My boyfriend starts frantically searching the room with a flashlight and a knife, not knowing what to do with himself. He says he was petting what he thought was Oatmeal, but once he got to the creature's head, its face was hairless, and the creature growled and bit him and ran off the bed. At this point, I'm in near tears. Now we are freaking out. All of the dots are starting to connect. Is it not a ghost, but this creature living above our bedroom in the attic, running up and down the stairs? Our husky suffered a large wound this week, where she mysteriously cut off nearly her entire paw pad. It was hanging on by a thread and luckily was able to be stitched back on. We searched our entire backyard and could not find the source of the incident. It literally looks like someone took a knife and sliced her paw pad off. The vet said the laceration goes completely under her pad and barely missed the artery under it. We at first assumed she must have cut it on our fence, but there was no blood anywhere on or directly by the fence. They have lived here for years without incident. Yes, this could be entirely unrelated, but could this be the creature's fault, too? I'm in desperate need of help. What is this thing, and how can I get rid of it? This was a few years ago. I was in my early 20s, and I felt very bad for having to go back to my hometown and sleep in my old kids' room, but I'd lost my job and the pandemic just hit. Everything was a mess. My parents are not nice people. They've been heavily abusive to both me and my sister as kids. Our grandfather from my father's side died in the garage of the house, struck by electricity in a horrible accident. The whole house has very dark, off energy which built up over the years, but even as a child I've always felt something heavily off about it. I've had numerous sleep paralysis ever since I went back in there, but nothing compares to what happened to me when I closed my eyes that night. My room was dark. There's a huge tree outside the house, and its branches cast a huge shadow across my whole room as there's a street lamp near the tree. I leave the curtains by the windows open, as it's very comforting to me to watch the branches wiggle across my room when the wind moves them. It helps me fall asleep. I remember zoning out into them as I closed my eyes for just a moment, and then, bam! I was somewhere else. As I mentioned, I've had sleep paralysis before, and I've had lucid dreaming for sure, but this was nothing like it. I was there. It felt like another dimension. I was not on Earth for sure, and the situation I was in was extremely unpleasant. My hands were cuffed behind my back, and I was on my knees in a huge area which resembled a coliseum. There were many seats surrounding the place I was in, but there was no audience sitting way up there. Instead, before me were several demonic creatures. Each of them seemed like they were entirely a different species. One of them was horned like a humanoid goat. One of them was tall and slim, as if he was made from pure black energy with glowing red eyes. One of them was a man whose upper body was of an eagle. There was someone else in the room as well, watching me from behind. You know that feeling you get when you know somebody's watching you from behind? It was like that. They were discussing something. The language they communicated in was extremely weird, and while I did not speak it, I had an idea of what they were talking about. As if this was definitely not the first time I've heard them talk. It was a place for judgment. They were weighing out the options for me. None of the entities was even remotely friendly. They did not look at me as they continued their discussion. Everything in the situation I was in felt like it had its own story and it had been resolving for a long time, but my subconsciousness was just dropped in here seconds ago and I was still trying to make sense of everything, like I just recently arrived and it was taking time to fully grasp everything. The whole vibe was absolutely terrifying. I was in sort of a trance state, just staring in front of me, swinging my head and my body sort of like I was going insane. Before I could even think about speaking or doing something, things quickly got even worse. The conversation between the entities went silent, and by the tone of their voice I understood they've come to an agreement. They started walking off in one of the corridors where they would quickly get lost. The Eagle Man moved his head down in a moment of slight sadness just before he walked off, like he was feeling slightly sorry for me. I could see they were almost gone, and then the second after that, she came, the entity that was behind me all this time. She showed herself in front of me. It was a very tall woman in a Japanese kimono. She had a huge golden crown, but her face was purely pale and her teeth were enormously big. She did not have eyes. There was a black void in her stare. She seemed weirdly pleased. It quickly made sense to me that they've decided they're going to leave me to her. Her intentions felt sinister in ways I cannot even begin to explain. I quickly came to my senses and got up, only my hands were cuffed. This was a very slight relief, but before I could even start running, she started walking towards me. She grabbed me, and as we made physical contact, my entire body shivered, and I felt like she was draining me, like I was an energy source and she was just sucking on it. I've felt a lot of different kinds of pain in my life. I've been hit by a car, I've fallen with my skateboard, I've felt emotionally traumatic pain in so many levels, and nothing compared even slightly to the pain I felt that night while I was touching her. A painful confirmation to me this was not a dream, once again. She was very determined as she dragged me towards something. I turned my head towards it for just a moment, and I noticed a huge white door. It was made out of blindingly white shimmer. My survival instinct kicked in. I had an inner feeling, and I knew for certain that if she managed to get me to the other side of that portal, I was done. And not only my body, but my entire soul, my whole existence. It would be over in the most ultimate death. I started pushing back with all my strength. She was a lot stronger, but I was slowing her down. She kept dragging me and pushing me towards the door. I was fighting it as tears ran down my face, my muscles hurt, my head was burning, but I was not giving up. Knowing what was going to happen, I couldn't let myself accept this fate. I had to fight till the end. She got me extremely close to the door, and one of my legs started slightly going inside the shimmery door. While it was inside of it, it felt like it ceased to exist. Everything felt hopeless until, finally, my intuition kicked in and I was able to grab the crown on her head. Even though my hands were cuffed, they suddenly weren't. With my very last strength, I pulled it from her as hard as I could. She kept pushing and pushing and pushing me through the door, and she almost had me, but in the very last second, I got the crown off her head. It fell down on the floor, and she started screaming so hard and so high-pitched that I fell down from the pain. My ears were bleeding, my nose as well. My view was heavily distorted. Moments later, I came to my senses and had a look around. The woman had turned to ashes right in front of the portal. Only her crown was left on the floor. The portal was still open. I survived. The only two ways to go in the room were the white door, which I was definitely not going to use, and the hallway where the other demons left into. I grabbed the fallen crown from the floor as I felt it could be used, and I put it on my head. I had a weird feeling take over, but it wasn't particularly bad. I left through the hallway. The next area was hard to describe. I realized the whole place I was in was deeply, deeply under the ground, as there was lava and fire everywhere. Some little creatures were mining on some weird-looking rocks. They acted like they didn't see me. The crown had made me invisible. I started going deeper and deeper, looking for a way out. I was definitely in limbo. The most creepy thing was those huge eyeballs which were found on the walls, observing like security cameras, making sure everything is in place. Even though I was invisible, I felt like I was far from safe. As I was walking backwards, making sure nobody was suspicious, I stumbled into someone and I knew I heavily fucked up. I started running faster and faster. There was a disturbing alarm sound. Everything was flashing. Next thing I heard was a rooster crowing. I opened my eyes and I was on the floor in my room. This was not a dream. I did not speak to anyone for weeks after this experience. I fell into a big depression after the experience, and even now, so many years later, it is extremely hard for me to think about all that I lived through that night. Was this hell? Am I still in there on the other side? Hello, my Vickies. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the like button as it's incredibly helpful to my growth here on YouTube. Leave a comment if you have a suggestion or simply want to say hello. And if you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description, as are other ways to support the channel if you feel so inclined. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. Thanks again so much for being here. I appreciate it beyond measure. And until next time, be good.